Hey guys, this is Jason, and today I am reviewing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, written and directed by James Gunn. It is the third Guardians film in the MCU, and it is considered to be James Gunn's final film in the MCU. Just like the first two films and the holiday special, this film once again stars Chris Pratt as Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, Zoe Saldana as Gamora, Dave Bautista as Groot, Karen Gillian as Nebula, Klementieff, I'm sorry if I got that name wrong, as Mantis, and featuring the voices of Vin Diesel as Groot and Bradley Cooper as Rocket. After the events of Avengers Infinity War, Peter Quill is still dealing with the loss of Gamora from the original Marvel timeline and is now dealing with this new Gamora that's not as well experienced with the other Guardians like the original was. And they have to protect one of their own against the High Evolutionary, or else it could end the Guardians as we know them. I was excited to see this film because I love the first Guardians of the Galaxy film. It was, to be honest, one of those films that was coming out that I wasn't excited for at all. I thought it was actually gonna be terrible because I wasn't as well experienced with the Guardians of the Galaxy as a kid. I never read any of the comics. I had no idea who any of the characters were because I was more experienced with other superheroes like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and a couple of members of the X-Men, but I had no idea who the Guardians were, so I really didn't have a lot of expectations for it. But the movie ended up being entertaining. It was actually awesome, and it made me slap myself in the face for actually doubting the film, and it made me take notice of James Gunn as a director. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I liked, but it's not as good as the first film. It does have some issues, like it does have a little bit too much of that humor, and the gold people really didn't need to be in the movie at all, but I still liked most of the characters, and I thought most of the humor was funny, and I liked the story that they were going for, and for me, Yondu was the best character in that film. And the holiday special that I didn't get a chance to review, but I did watch, it was just delightful. I thought it had really good comedy, and I liked the idea of Mantis and Drax just trying to abduct Kevin Bacon for Star-Lord. That's a really funny plot, and it also has a very touching moment at the end, and I'm not gonna spoil it just in case you haven't seen it. And this is confirmed to be James Gunn's final film in the MCU before he decides to do more of his comic book stuff with DC, because he's had some problems with Marvel in the past. He said some stuff on Twitter that made Marvel upset and had to fire him for that, and then over a few months later they had to hire him back because no one wanted to do a Guardians 3 besides him. It's a long story. And with all of that in mind, I was hoping that this film would be a satisfying conclusion to the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. And was it satisfying? I mean, I think so. I had a lot of fun with this movie. I mean, it's still not a great movie. It's not as good as the first film. For me, it's kind of on par with the second film, even though I do like this film just a teensy tad more than the second film for a few reasons. From the opening scene that gives a very somber and dark tone for the movie by a character listening to the song Creep by Radiohead, and you see what that character had to deal with before that playing, you get the sense that this film might be a little more dark and serious than the first two films, and sure, it still has that usual Marvel humor, but this film does have some surprisingly dark moments. In particular, you see flashbacks of Rocket Raccoon and why he became who he is as we know him today, and when those flashbacks happen, they give the film a much more dark feel and made me feel bad for Rocket in those scenes and have some pretty disturbing moments, which if you're an animal lover, this has some moments involving animals that could bother you. And for me, Rocket was the one that I felt bad for the most throughout the film. Like, every time it would cut back to him when he was a little raccoon, it's a little tragic to see what he goes through, and Bradley Cooper was excellent as the character, especially with those dramatic moments. And that brings me to what I liked about the first two Guardians films, the holiday special, and most of the MCU films, is that it still does a good job at building character development and getting you to understand where these characters are going from and what they had to go through throughout this journey. And that's something I've always liked about these films, that they know how to build character. I think both Mantis and Drax are some of the funniest parts of this film. They have most of the best lines. In particular, there's one scene where Drax is trying to talk to Peter Quill about something involving a pond that I thought was one of the funniest parts in the film. It just really surprised me that they went for that. Granted, I really shouldn't be surprised to hear that from a James Gunn movie, because James Gunn is mostly known for using that kind of humor in his films, like in his older films Slither and Super, which are both really good dark comedies, by the way. Please watch them if you haven't. And of course, his Suicide Squad film and Peacemaker. Which brings me to another thing I want to mention. I thought this was still a very funny movie. I mean, it does have a couple of moments that fell flat in regards to the humor, but I still found myself laughing at most of the humor this movie has. I thought the action was a lot of fun. In particular, there's this one scene where the Guardians are fighting a bunch of aliens in a hallway. That I thought was a pretty awesome scene and was also very brutal. Which also brings me to this part. It does have some pretty dark and graphic moments. I mean, there isn't a lot in the film, but it does have some moments that could bother some people. I still thought all the acting was great. Like I've already mentioned, Bradley Cooper as Rocket Raccoon. Zoe Saldana is great as a newer and less experienced version of Gamora. I still like Chris Pratt as Star-Lord. He's really good in this movie, especially for the dramatic moments. He really doesn't get a lot of credit for some of the dramatic stuff he's in, and he's really good at it. Dave Bautista and Klementieff as Mantis, again, I'm sorry if I'm getting that name wrong, are both hilarious in the film, and I still like Vin Diesel as the voice of Groot. I mean, really, everyone in the acting did a great job. And I like Karen Gillian as Nebula this time around. Her voice didn't annoy me. She wasn't always talking like this in every sentence she has. She was more, I wouldn't say calmer, but she didn't use that voice that much, and I thought she did a really good job as the character this time around. It's not an amazing film though, and I do have some issues with it, like I've already mentioned earlier, and some of that is because this movie has some subplots that they set up in the beginning of the film, but they aren't always explored. They are sometimes just tossed aside for the main big parts of the film. Like with Nebula, you would think that she would try to work things out again with Gamora after what they've been through in the first two films, but they really don't do much of that, or really any of that in the film for some reason. It just gets tossed aside, like I said. They really don't explore it that much in this film for some reason. There are also some characters in this film that don't always get their time to shine. Like, for instance, there's a character in this film named Adam Warlock, played by Will Poulter, I think that's how you say his name, who is there to find the Guardians of the Galaxy and kill them. And spoilers for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, one of the credit scenes of that film set him up as a big threat, and in this film, he doesn't do much. He just flies around the galaxy just looking for the Guardians, and the movie doesn't cut to him a whole lot, and he's kind of in the background throughout most of the film. I mean, Will Poulter was fine as Adam Warlock. He wasn't bad in the film. It's just the writing that was the problem. There wasn't really anything interesting about him. He was just a big gold villain that's looking for the Guardians, and that's it. And the last issue I have with this film, which is also a very common issue that most of these Marvel films have, is the villain of the film, the High Evolutionary. I'm not gonna say the actor's name because I'm afraid I'm gonna butcher it, so I'm just gonna leave a text of the name in the bottom of the screen for you. And he's not a very interesting villain for the most part. He's just some bad guy that wants to make everything right his way, and he wants everything in the world to be perfect in how he shaped it because it's not how he really pictured it, so he has to do terrible things to do that. Yeah, not a very compelling villain for me. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is not a great movie, unfortunately. It does have some issues, like some subplots getting tossed aside. Adam Warlock is not a very interesting character, and it has a very weak villain, but it still had some characters that I had fun seeing banter. It still has some really fun action, humor that mostly landed for me. It also tugs in the heartstrings in a few scenes, and has some very dark moments, and Rocket had some pretty tragic moments throughout the film. If you're a fan of the first two Guardians of the Galaxy films, I do recommend you watching this film. You might have a more fun experience with this film than I did, because it definitely has some moments that could make you a little teary-eyed if you love the first two films and these characters throughout all three of these films and the holiday special. But if you didn't like the Guardians films, then you might not enjoy this film because it has some humor that you might roll your eyes for. I'm gonna give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 a B+. It's in theaters now, and I hope you enjoy it if you love the first two films, and if maybe you're a Marvel fan in general like I am. And yes, I am a fan of Marvel, as you can tell in the background, despite a lot of people around me telling me not to be. I still enjoy most of the films. Not all of them, but at least most of them, and some I do like pretty much, and I do hope Marvel's next few films end up being great, because the MCU hasn't made some of the greatest movies of all time. They've kind of been in a slump with their movies and shows. Some I've actually really liked, like Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and Spider-Man No Way Home, but they've also made some films that I'm not a huge fan of, like Thor Love and Thunder, or Eternals, or most recently, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. And even though I do really like No Way Home, I still have a lot of fun watching it, and I do like the story that they went with, but I'm not afraid to admit that that movie's really just a big, fun, fan service movie with stuff we've already seen in other Spider-Man films. So let's just hope that Marvel's next film ends up becoming one of their best. Like in the veins of the first Iron Man film, and not a lot of people talk about that film actually. I mean, this movie did change the game. That movie's the reason we have an MCU right now, and it's still an awesome movie in general, especially if you remove, like, the Avengers setup stuff in that film. So guys, if you have seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, what did you think about it? Did you love it as much as I hoped I would? Or did you just hate this film and you're one of those people that's not really a fan of Marvel at all? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like this review, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.